Hello, this is Paula White, your instructor for ACC499. This is week 3. And so far, I think it's been a pretty interesting class. Today, we're going to be talking about working with attorneys. I'm just going to do a quick review of the chapter. Well, first, we're going to do a quick review of the classroom. Let me get there. In this week, we're going to be covering chapter 20. Let's go up to the actual home. Okay, so our discussion this week is going to be on, do you feel the current level of oversight is justified and good, or overstepping government boundaries and stifles business? Why or why not? So that should be a very interesting one to research and write on, because it is certainly a line that keeps getting pushed toward government, toward business, toward government, toward business. And which way is our businesses feeling the push is now, and which way is government feeling that the push is now? It is a line that keeps moving between the two. So this should be a very interesting paper to write and for me to read. Okay, let's go back. And your assignment this week is to write a 1 to 2 page paper like before. And when matters arise at a company that require an investigation, in-house or outside counsel often participate in or direct that investigation. And the forensic accounting investigator, you, often work with such counsel. So for this week's paper, you're supposed to describe the proper way an accounting investigator should work with an attorney, and how evidence should be collected and cared for. And remember to reference all your sources. And then you have the normal assessment, multiple choice test that you always have. So let's go back to the PowerPoint and do a quick review. Of the chapter. So investigations that happen inside a company, often the first person that's contacted is the in-house counsel. That's the in-house staff of attorneys. And the forensic accounting investigators can work with or for these attorneys in areas including anonymous tips, audit committee concerns, internal audit, when the internal auditors find something that they want to be able to look further into or pass it on for a true investigation, and external auditor findings, regulatory inquiries, and regulatory investigations such as the SEC, enforcement actions and inquiries from the U.S. Department of Justice, tax authority subpoenas or inquiries, and it doesn't have to be government or internal related. It could be civil litigation, such as contract issues, law, lawsuits from shareholders, fraud recovery. The book also talks about confidentiality requirements, forming the investigative team. What do you need to know about documentation? And use of the discovery process in civil litigation. In interviewing, this is a quick review of a previous chapter. In interviewing, you have lack of subpoena power. The person's in the room with you voluntarily, unless it's under an attorney, unless it's under a subpoena, but usually when you're dealing with the person, it's voluntary. This testimony is not under oath. Interviews that are more informal than depositions. And your interviews rely on cooperation and availability of the interviewee. Oh my. External audit firm. You'll be dealing with them. So should they be the firm to do the fraud investigation? There's pros and cons described in the book. And there's also Sarbanes-Oxley considerations. And that's a very good discussion in the book. Working for or interacting with law enforcement agencies and government agencies. Again, the book covers that well. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of what the chapter is going to be about. What happens when you disagree with counsel? So to summarize the chapter, we work collaboratively within the investigative team assembled by the client. Frequent conference calls are likely to facilitate this objective. Communicate early and often with your team. When disagreements arise as to approach, it's not uncommon. Discuss them immediately and thoroughly to reach a mutual understanding. Get those issues out of the way quickly. Demonstrate respect and recognize the distinct expertise of the various investigative team members. You will all have different strengths. Both counsel and the forensic accounting investigator have unique skill sets that may be critical to the success of the investigation. Egos should not get in the way of serving the client. Foster a professional, cooperative environment. We have a job to do. Let's work together to get it done, should be your mantra. Acknowledge and manage the typically high-pressure environment and the likelihood of external scrutiny. Understand the rules of the game in regards to documentation and report expectations, other parties involved, the expected level of assistance from the company, the 6E restrictions, Section 10A requirements, and so on. And you're supposed to have a clearly understood role and delineated responsibilities in an effort to minimize duplication or, worse, gaps in the investigative process. So I have a couple videos, and one is on understand your allegation and tips to conducting international investigations.
All right, welcome to this month's edition of Fraud Talk. I'm John Gill, Vice President of Education, and our guest today is Leah Lane. Leah is a Global Investigations Director for a large multinational company, and she's been working with large companies and organizations for more than 20 years doing all types of investigations, but she's had a lot of experience doing investigations that cross borders. And as any of you listening know, that anytime you cross a border during an investigation, that opens up a whole different can of worms. And so we're just going to talk to Leah today about some of her experiences. So Leah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with when you first get that allegation coming in, you start looking at it, you discover, okay, well, this may involve one or more countries. Where do you start logistically in beginning that investigation?
Well, John, I'd like to say that it's completely like any other investigation, but it's not. There is no single set of ground rules for conducting cross-border investigations. I wish there were. But you do start out initially like you would any investigation. You start out with your pre-investigation. But that pre-investigation is a little different because you need to address some very important issues. I will probably just give you kind of the top three. The top three are maybe restrictions on data gathering and collection. There are local laws in varying countries that have privacy data. They even have blocking laws that you need to be aware of from the very beginning of your investigation. That's before you gather any documents or collect any evidence. Another second one is legal privilege. You need to know before you begin your investigation, is the country that you're going to be investigating in, does legal privilege even work in that country, and how does it work? And the third one would probably be language and communication barriers, cultural differences. You need to know that from the very beginning of your investigation so that you can plan accordingly. Operational considerations are really important as well, and it really depends on the allegation that you have. Will you be able to brief your senior leadership in that country and gain assistance from them? Or are you actually investigating your senior leadership in that country, and you have to completely go external to your company for that assistance and that guidance?
In the planning process, how does it change it from just a normal, typical domestic investigation when you find out it's going to be international? What do you add to your fraud examination or fraud investigation plan?
Your plan is going to be a little different for cross-border investigations. So in a typical investigation plan, you're going to list kind of your scope and some of the things that you want to gather related to that allegation. You need to make sure when you're writing your plan that you're taking into account what kind of documents are you seeking. Are they publicly available documents? Are they protected documents? Are you going to be able to interview your employees in the language that you're accustomed to? Are you going to have to seek legal counsel to get a translator? The evidence that you're going to gather, that you put into your plan, you really need to consider evidence ownership versus evidence control. And what I mean by that is, in today's technical world, more and more people are using PDAs or using smartphones for work, iPads for work and personal. And so if that information's on there, can you then look at that evidence and can then you bring it back to the U.S. or is it blocked by local law? So a lot of things when you're putting together your investigation plan, you're listing out your key witnesses. You also need to check because at some point in time, you're going to travel to that country to perform that investigation, to actually do those interviews. And one thing a lot of people forget is make sure to check in that country whether there are any major holidays that are different from your home country. You don't want to spend all the money and take your team into a country when all the people that you want to interview are on holiday, or if it's a major holiday season. A lot of people can take holiday. You want to make sure the bulk of the people that you want to. All of this the biggest thing also that you need to focus on for your investigative plan is who's going to lead the investigation. is the person in your home country the same lead that's going to then travel and perform that investigation and be a lead on the ground? Oftentimes, there are two separate people. Maybe an attorney here in the United States is going to manage that investigation and lead that investigation, and they're going to send an investigator on the ground. You need to make sure that your investigator plan discusses or addresses the fact of who's going to lead it when you're on the ground and what kind of authority they're going to have on that ground. Another key thing that in the planning process you need to understand is confidentiality. Confidentiality means many different things in many different countries. So you need to address in your plan exactly who's going to be notified of the investigation, who's going to be updated, and who's not going to be notified as it relates to the investigation when you go in country.
Leah, what's been some of your experience about how to best go about gathering some of this information? Talking about how important it was, and you're absolutely right, to learn what the ground rules are wherever you're going as to types of information, privileges involved, legal rules and regulations. And I know this varies according to the size of the organization, but just taking your organization as an example, do you have people internally that you can go to for this information, or do you typically have to find somebody on the outside to help you with the laws or regulations in a particular area?
Well, like I said, each investigation is going to be unique, but in my experience with my organization, we have about half and half. So basically, I'll have someone in my company I can go to, probably in my legal department, that I'm going to go to at the very beginning of my investigation and say, hey, I have an investigation that's going to be in this country. This is the allegation, and this is what I want to do related to that allegation. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions like, am I going to be able to collect these documents, and am I going to be able to do a forensic examination of their laptop? Is that allowable under local employment law? Am I going to be able to interview them? Can I compel them to be interviewed? Are they allowed by local law to have a witness in their interview? Are they a union employee? These kinds of things. And my attorneys mostly are in the United States. And what we're going to do is we're going to retain counsel in the country that we're going into to assist us with those and help us navigate the employment laws and the privacy laws of that specific country. Because I really think, and this is one of my biggest tips to give someone who's working a cross-border investigation, is that to protect yourself and your company, you really need the knowledge of someone who is local to that country for employment laws, privacy laws, and to navigate the culture there.
Well, and as a lawyer, I will, strongly second that. And if you're working with management, sometimes it can be expensive, but it's much easier to do it right in the beginning than face litigation later on. And it's amazing how rules can be so different in different countries. Just gathering information about someone over the internet can sometimes, in some countries, be a violation.
Oh, absolutely. And people have to know that violations of applicable data protection and privacy data laws may result in the imposition of criminal sanctions. I mean, we've seen in China where an investigator was arrested for illegally obtaining personal information of a Chinese citizen. Now, he didn't personally obtain that information. He hired an agency that then supplied that information, just like if we were doing a background check and I hire someone to do a background check on a company. I'm relying on them to do that legally, but they're going to give me that information. And again, I'm hoping that they gather that legally and I pay them. If they did not, then I am still partially responsible for that information because I purchased it. So you have to be extremely careful about what you request, for people that you hire in country.
Besides the laws, the other major issue in dealing with international investigations is the culture of the particular area. And again, that differs dramatically around the globe. So what are some of the things that you're thinking about during the investigation and trying to adapt to the culture in that area?
Yeah, cultural sensitivities are a major factor when you're working with people from other countries. What may be acceptable to say or do in one culture could be extremely offensive in another culture. And you need to know culturally what's best for your investigators on the ground to help them. And when I say that, I mean if you're going in to interview, you need to know culturally what's going to assist you in that interview. And it may be bringing up loyalty to the company, because some cultures value loyalty. It may be obligations. Some cultures will value that obligation trigger, but you need to know what you can say, how to introduce yourself. You need to make sure that the person sitting opposite of you, when you call yourself an investigator, they don't mistakenly believe you're law enforcement. So you have to really understand the words that you're using if you're speaking English and English is not their first language.
Where do you find the best place to obtain that information is? Do you usually talk to the people like in the division there locally first?
I actually go to a couple of different sources for that. So, I'm actually going to, before I start my interview, sit down with my legal counsel in country and ask them, what am I allowed by law to do? Am I allowed to, make an allegation directly to them? Am I allowed to, talk to them one-on-one? Is a witness requested? What culturally is going to help me? And then I'm also going to reach out to my HR partner in that country and ask for what kind of tips can they give me related to the culture. What will work in putting that person at ease and comfort so that they're able to just sit down and talk with me and tell me what I want to know. So a couple of different sources. If I have the way my organization is set up, we have a worldwide security department that's in most countries where we do business. And I'm probably going to also go to that security officer in that country and ask them about the culture as well. So I go to a couple of different sources, and I think it's important that you go to more than one source and to get that information, because everybody has different views.
And speaking of lessons that you learn sometimes the hard way, what are some of the things that you've learned over the years that you'd like to share with people as to what to consider and what to do when you've got a potential cross-border investigation?
Those lessons are hard learned sometimes. And this might go for all investigations, but especially important in cross borders is understanding your allegations from the beginning. And understand that when you go in country and start speaking to people and asking them about this one allegation you're looking into, other information is going to come out. One of the second lessons that's hard learned is evidence collection. With the privacy laws and data protection laws, once with technology today, in-case enterprise and things like that, it's absolutely technically available for you to grab information from another country while sitting in your home country. Technically, I can have my IT people pull documents from a computer that's across the world. But is it legal? So one of the hardest lessons I've learned is, and what everybody wants to do is immediately upon getting that allegation to start gathering documents. Hold off until you speak to legal and find out if gathering documents and then transferring them cross-border is allowed. Because you might be allowed to gather those documents in country, but because of blocking laws, you might not be able to transfer them back for any, judicial hearings here. So that's one of the things that's very important to understand is make sure before you start gathering any document that you've received advice from legal counsel who's knowledgeable about the local laws in that country.
That's a really good point, you're exactly right. It comes as a surprise to a lot of people that when you transfer data across borders, that can trigger sanctions, and so you do need to have some counsel advising you as you go along. And just because you can gather it one place, if you remove it back to the United States, that could trigger some problems. So that's an excellent point. Well, that's great advice, and we appreciate your taking the time to talk about this. So let me see if I can just kind of sum up some of the major points. First is, if you've got a potential cross-border investigation, get with legal counsel. It could be here and in the area where you're going, just to make sure that you understand what you can and can't do and what the rules are. So the first thing is legal counsel, good legal advice. Second is figure the culture out. Do some research, talk to people so that you know if you get there, you can be most effective and get what you need by following the rules and customs of wherever you're at. And then the third thing is planning. It's organization beforehand, and then revising it and continue once you get in country, and just make sure that you're staying on top of everything, and as things change, that you know what's going on. So you think that's a fair assessment?
I do. I would only add one thing to that, and it's be extremely careful of requesting information. Make sure you're legally entitled to that information before you request it, because people want to help you. And if you ask for something, they'll want to get it for you, whether it's legally or not. And so just be very careful what you request. Make sure you're legally entitled to that information.
That's great. Well, Leah, thank you again for taking time to share with our listeners your experiences, and that's been very interesting. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, John.
Thank you for listening to this month's Fraud Talk. You can find a list of all of our podcasts on our website at acfe.com/podcast.
Well, I thought that was very interesting today because it summarized this week's chapter, but it took it out of the domestic market of the United States and did a spin on the same material as it goes global. And that's very important to realize. And I think you also picked up how important the team effort is and how important it is to get a good team built. Like she had that one example where someone was accused of having illegal information or having obtained information illegally, and that person didn't do it personally. That person hired someone to obtain information, and you assume that the information would be obtained in a legal way, and they got the information, so they ended up having information that was illegally obtained, and the owner goes on to the person obtaining it incorrectly, illegally, but also the person who caused the information to be illegally obtained, or caused the information to be obtained, not realizing it was going to be illegal. So I thought that was a very interesting recap of this week's chapter. Now we're going to have another audio, on RESPECT, the key of getting a signed statement. So this deals with the actual interviews. And here it goes.
I'm John Gill, and welcome to this month's edition of Fraud Talk, ACFE's podcast. My guest today is Evie Pampouris. Evie is one of the instructors for our Principles of Fraud examination class, and she's actually just gotten through a session on obtaining confessions and doing signed statements. And so I asked her if she would mind coming over to the ACV headquarters and talking to me a little bit about some tips on how to work with someone to get them more amenable to possibly confessing and kind of telling you exactly what they went on, even though when you first sit down, that's usually not the mood that the person's in. They're usually sitting there thinking, okay, how much do they know? Is there a way that I can kind of just fake my way through this? What are some of your experiences in, like when you first sit down with somebody, what do you think is mostly going through their mind?
They're trying to feel you out, and they're also assessing you. They think the interviewer is just assessing the interviewee, but they don't stop to take a moment that that person that's sitting in that chair is sizing you up as well. So you should take a moment and think, are you presentable? What are you presenting when you walk into the room? Is your shirt wrinkled? Are your shoes not shined? And these sound like silly little things, but you're exuding an image, and that image is either I'm well put together, and that translates to that person, you know what, this person's a serious person, they're professional. But if you're disheveled, if your hair's unruly, if your shirt's untucked, if you're wrinkled, if your shoes aren't shined, then that person perceives that as a sign of weakness, and you're already starting behind the 8 ball. So I think that's the first thing you want to work on. And think of it this way, if you saw you walk into the room, what impression would you get? And that kind of sets the tone of where you're going to go from there.
Well, let's say you polish your shoes and you're looking nice and you sit down with them. What's the first thing that you're going to do next?
When you walk into the interview room, you want to be engaging with the person, whether you like the person or not, whether you like what they've done or not. Your personal biases, your opinions, those need to be checked out the door. And you need to understand that it's not about you, it's about that person. So when you walk in, hello, my name is Evie, it's nice to meet you. You can state your title if you need to, but if you're not required to, I would avoid those types of formalities. You don't really want to tell them, hello, I'm a fraud investigator. That's going to kind of set the tone that, wow, this is serious, because that has a serious connotation to it. So if you can avoid that, do that. And you want to make it informal. Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for coming in to see me. Have a seat. Have a seat here. And that's another thing. Another way to exude authority in the room is for you to tell that person what to do. And one of the simplest ways you can do that is don't let that person sit where they want. Show them where to sit. And when you do these little things, it shows them that you have authority in the room and you're setting the tone of who's in charge without you having to tell them or remind them, I'm in charge here.
Some of the introductory questions that you're asking, what are the purposes of maybe asking them where they're from or how long they worked here? What are those questions set up?
Two things. One, it helps you get data and information on that person, because a lot of people may use different names, different social security numbers. You want to get as much information as you can. Get an address, get family members. Maybe you can ask them about their family, where they're from, so you can build information around this person. Because often people, especially repeat offenders, they've got different backgrounds, different people, different social security numbers, different names. So on one sense, you're able to authenticate and get all the information you need to know who you're speaking to and to build a case. And on the other sense, as far as the interviewing portion goes, it helps you find out what the norm is of the person. So what does that mean when we talk about norm? It means I want to see who you are normally. I want to see you relaxed. I want to see how you interact with others. I want to see how you speak, what you say, what you don't say, your gestures. So I want to see you in that capacity, because later on in the interview, when I start asking you these uncomfortable questions and it starts to get stressful, then I can see that clear shift in your behavior, because that's what happens. Think of it this way. You're comparing the unstressed out person, the unthreatened person, they're not stressed, and you're taking that and you're comparing them to when they're stressed out, when they're intense, when they're feeling those questions, when the heat is on. So you're comparing those two individuals. And if you see a drastic difference in that, then a lot of that will show you the key indicators you need to look for deception. So for example, if somebody is sitting in the room and throughout the whole interview, they're always scratching their head, but they've been doing it from the beginning, then that just means that's a personal tick that person has regardless. But if they're not doing it at all, and then you start later as you go into the interview and you ask those questions, you know, did you take that money? And then they start scratching their head. That's a sign. That's an indication that they're stressed out and they're behaving and they're showing you those indications of deception. So that's what helps you.
Let's say you get into a sensitive area and you're thinking, okay, they're definitely exhibiting some signs of stress, but they're adamant that I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't have any, I don't have any knowledge of that. I wasn't there. What are some tools to try and break down those barriers?
The big thing is this, it's confidence. You have to have confidence in the room and confidence in what you're doing. If the person across from you senses that you're not confident, you're done, game over. So even if you're not, just don't show it. You have to have a good, I call it the poker face. You have to have a good poker face. Think about those people you watch on TV when they're playing poker. They've got the glasses on and the hats on. And you can't see what's going on because they're hiding the visuals that their face could give away. It's the same thing with you. Don't give it away. So if you don't know, go in it as if you do know. Let that person think you know what you're doing, because the moment they think that you don't have it together, that you're missing something, or that they think that they can change you or change your mind, it puts you way behind. And that's the key thing. And then as far as approaching them with the things you can say, they're going to give you denials. They're going to say certain things. I don't know. You need to press people. A lot of times people feel uncomfortable doing interviews because there's a sense of confrontation. There's a sense of calling people out, and people don't like to be called out. They don't like to call other people out, and they don't like confrontation. If you don't like confrontation, or let me correct it, if you're not comfortable with confrontation, then you're going to have a difficult time speaking with people, because people will get confrontational with you. They'll say to you, why are you accusing me of this? I told you I didn't do this. They're going to get in your face. It's quite possible they will. And they're going to try to fight because they don't want to go to jail. They don't want to get fired. They don't want to be labeled as a thief. So yes, you're going to have to work for that.
How important is it to kind of check your personal bias at the door? For instance, they think that you're judgmental. How is that going to affect the interview process?
Yeah, that's like the kiss of death for an interviewer. If somebody thinks you're judging them, then you might as well just leave the room. That's not what that's about. The interview is not about you. It's not about you making the other person feel bad for what they did or judging what they did. You have to understand you are there as a professional. You are there to collect information. You are there to elicit information. Then you are to take that information and give it to the people and allow the judge and jury, let those people pass judgment, not you. But your job is to collect, and you cannot collect information from people when they feel that you're judging them. Who likes to be judged? Nobody, no matter what you've done. Who likes to have their faults shoved in their face? No. But if you do that in the interview room, you know what you're telling that person? Don't talk to me. And they won't. They're either going to start filtering what they're saying, or they're just going to shut down. They're going to not tell you anything. So it's not about you. It's not about the interviewer. You are the professional. You check your biases and ego out the door. It's not about pride. Somebody may even get in your face. They may even insult you during the interview. Again, you command respect and authority through your behavior. And you can check people when you need to, so you can kind of keep that ambiance in place of who's in charge of the room or not. But you're not there to take things personally. None of it is personal. This person's going to speak to you the same way they would speak to anybody else sitting across from them, because they just don't want to go to jail. They don't want to lose their job. So don't take things personally. If you're taking it personal, then you don't belong in that room.
Let's say you get the first admission that they admit, well, I did take some money. It just kind of happened. I didn't really plan this out in advance. Once you get that first admission, how do you proceed from there? What other types of information do you want to elicit at this point?
So once somebody just kind of, they show you that you're able to crack their armor, so to speak, and then they leak it out, look, I didn't plan this, it kind of happened. Be like, that's okay. This is good. Tell me about that. Tell me about what happened. And that's it. Leave it. Let them speak. Don't hit with those questions yet, because now you've just kind of cracked their armor and they're starting to speak. Don't say anything, because you may shut them down. You're still kind of like in in sensitive waters here, the key is to get them comfortable enough to keep going. To be like, tell me about that. That's okay, okay. And then it's never a big deal. No matter what they confess to, no matter how bad it sounds, it's never a big deal to you. You don't ever make it seem like it's a big deal. And that's how you would go about it. You let them speak, you let them share their story, and then later on, then you come in with those follow-up questions. Well, how about this? Well, how much money would you say? Okay, is there anything left of some of the money that you took? Do you know of any other people involved? What else can you tell me? What about this individual? And that's when you follow up with these questions. But if you notice, my questions are always very neutral, right? I don't want to make it seem that I'm very, very interested, but I also don't want to seem too relaxed. I'm in the middle.
You get them to give you some of this information, and you want to get a written record for the file. So the next thing you do is like, well, how do you mention and approach the aspect of getting a signed statement from?
Yeah, so this is interesting, because this is where everybody kind of gets worried. How do I get this person to write this down? How do I approach it? You approach it the way you've been approaching everything throughout the whole interview. It's not a big deal. Nothing is ever a big deal. Okay, well, this is great. We're just going to put this down on paper just to make sure that I have everything accurately, that there's no misunderstandings and nobody's thinking you took $1 million when it was only, $200,000. We don't want to have any mistakes on that part. So that's a way you can, express it to that person. And you also present in a way where they don't have a choice. You're not saying, can I take a statement? You're going to tell them, we're going to, take a statement. We're just going to write this down. And you don't even have to use the word statement because it sounds very official. Okay, we're just going to jot some of this down just to make sure it's all accurate information. And that's it. And you go from there. But if you give them a choice, you're sabotaging yourself.
To get something down on paper, what are a couple of different ways that you can go about it?
So there's a lot of different thoughts on that. One of the best ways would be to have that person write the statement in their own handwriting, but for you to dictate what they should write. I personally like this because, one, you're getting them to write it. It's in their own handwriting. And then so that means that they took time and they wrote it and it's in their own handwriting. And that you're also telling them what to write, in that if you allow somebody to write on their own, they're going to start kind of getting sidetracked. They're going to write what they want. They may decide to leave out some of the things they told you. And then it gets complicated if you just let them freelance it and free write it on their own. Don't let them do that, because you know what you need. You know you need them to write, I committed X amount of fraud, X amount of dollars on this date, this many times. So then you can dictate to them. Be like, okay, this is what you should write. And again, when you say it, it's not a big deal. You use soft words. You don't use words like steal, lie, embezzle, fraud. You don't use those words. You say, okay, my name is, Evie Pompuris. I'm writing this state. I'm writing this out of my own, on my own. This is voluntary on such and such date. Just get straight to the facts. On this date, I took X amount of dollars. I did this many times. This person helped me. This is how I did it. Write those things out. Avoid the strong words. And then at the end, have them write, I know this was wrong. I feel bad about it. I want to try to make things right and pay back restitution. And I'm willing to cooperate. So now you have your facts. And then at the bottom, you have intent. And you have that person acknowledging that what they did was wrong. And that's important. So that's the one aspect of it. But now look, if you write it yourself, that's fine too. But you always risk, a lawyer or later on somebody saying, well, you wrote the statement. They didn't write it. That's okay. You can have them write it. They can sign it. Again, if you're just, have somebody else witness. But these are always things that you risk when you do these interviews. Somebody can come back and say something different. But I definitely would not let the person write it on their own, because they're going to ramble and just kind of write whatever they feel like writing.
And you mentioned something in class today that I thought was a good idea. If you write the statement out, set up a recorder and have them read the statement aloud, and you record it while they read it.
Yes, so you can do that, absolutely. So if they write it, actually, you should do this no matter what, but if they write it, and then you say, okay, read this out loud for me, and if you record that, now you have that. You hear the person reading the statement, saying, okay, do you feel comfortable with that? Is that accurate? Anything else you want to add? No, this is correct. This is accurate. This is what we talked about. Now you have that person on tape consenting, and then they read through the whole thing. So they can't turn around and say, well, she wrote it, and I don't know what she wrote.
If someone does confess orally during the interview, there may be a temptation for some people like, okay, well, I have witnesses. We all heard it. That's all we need. And just let's go ahead and quit while we're ahead and let them go. Why would you, if someone was telling you that was their procedure, why would you tell them to try as best that they can to get a signed statement while they're there?
You know, it's interesting you say that. You just reminded me of an interview I had done on someone, and they gave up a lot of information, and then they thanked me, and everything went well. And then after the interview was over, they made a phone call to the offices where I worked and said, "Look, you know, I feel uncomfortable. This, you know, I admitted to things that I shouldn't have, and the individual who interviewed me, being me, made me feel like I had to say these things, and none of the things I said were correct." So they went on and on about the verbal stuff. And so then I get a call from my supervisor saying, hey, this person said that they kind of felt intimidated and they felt they had to say these things to you. And I said, that's kind of interesting, because they felt very good to write it all down in their own handwriting. Here you go. Here's all 2 pages. So what that person did initially was to try to discredit me through the verbal conversation. They had forgotten about the written statement. And so I used that written statement. I said, here it is in black and white. And we always hear that. I will need to see it in black and white. When you get a written statement, it's good, especially if you're by yourself in the interview room with that person, because now you're going to get into the he said, she said thing, and then you might be called out and it's questionable. But when you get it written down, you can say, look, not only do I know they said this, but they wrote this down, and guess what? It's in their handwriting.
Well, Abby, thank you for joining us. This has been very interesting. I've enjoyed it. And so do you have maybe one final comment for the listeners to, if they remember nothing else, remember this?
Be professional. Be a professional in that room. Some of the people you speak to, they won't be professional. Most of them won't. And don't mimic their behavior, and don't get pulled into that. You maintain above board, you be professional, and you treat people with dignity and respect. Regardless of what happens at that room, there's no reason to disrespect anybody or to not treat them with dignity. And that will go a long way for you. There are countless confessions that I've gotten. And then at the end, sometimes when I felt comfortable enough, I would ask the person, I would say, why did you tell me this? And often I would hear, because you were nice to me, because you treated me better than the other person treated me. And actually, that reminds me of another interview I did with a young woman. And she was also involved in some type of fraud. And law enforcement had actually interviewed her multiple times. And she denied it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it. So at this point, she was going to walk because they didn't have enough on her. And I was asked to go up there and speak to her, which I did. And in the end, she gave me everything. At the end of the interview, I asked her, I was like, can I ask you, why did you tell me all of this? And you didn't tell the other officers. She said, because you were nice to me and they weren't. It's really as simple as that. Sometimes that will get you the confession, just the way you treat people alone.
That wraps up another episode of Fraud Talk. You can find more podcasts at acfe.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you next month.
Well, that was very interesting. Excuse me. If this is an area that you are interested in, these jobs are very, very good jobs. And as people ending or in your academic career to become professional accountants and perhaps CPAs, CFEs, certified fraud examiners, this is a very good area to get into. Fraud will always be around. Lawsuits will always be around. And respect of yourself and respect of who you're dealing with. As I was listening to this today, it works for her, and she's nice to people, but she is professional, above board, and she's in control. Those are all qualities that will get you far in your career. Also, whether or not you are interviewing someone up for fraud, just in your normal everyday life as a professional, dressing well, respecting the other person, being calm when you're questioned, being calm when questioning. All these are professional skills. She's just, in a very nice interview, put together, and she's actually put it inside of the interview room, where all the other examiners and law enforcement, they try to play what? Bad cop, good cop? Well, good cop works for her, but it also works in business. So I just wanted to put that spin on it. I think these were two excellent audios to listen to bring out the life in the chapter. And with that, I'll say goodbye, and let me know if you have questions. I'm always available through email or message me, and I will see you next week.